Good afternoon, good morning, good lunchtime, no matter where you join us. It's myself and Paul Kelly. We are back. We are in preview mode, and we are here as part of, I suppose, of a monster preview sessions we've got coming up this week. Obviously, for the super card that's taking place in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. We are here previewing the fight. Well, the fight that's taking place at light heavy. It's a unification fight. If you depending on which sort of belts you want to count as being world title belts. Dmitrii Bivol versus Lyndon Arthur for the IBO and WBA light heavyweight world titles. Paul, thank you very much for joining me as always. Lovely to speak to you. Without wishing to, to beat around the bush too much, just want to get stuck right into this, don't we? And I'm going to land, well, to be honest, Bivol himself is not necessarily a knockout punch. So I'm going to probably land something which is more akin to his rival, Bitabayev here, by asking you something such as this. Is Bivol, though, Paul, number one at light heavyweight? Yes or no?
Oh, thanks for that astute breakdown there, mate. Glad to be back doing another preview with yourself. Plenty more on the channel, but yes, we're together for at least one here. Yeah, do you know what, mate? I think he is the number one at light heavyweight in short. The reason I say that is I just feel that Artur Beterbiev is potentially a little past his best. Obviously, he's still elite and is they are the number one and two in the division, Bivol and Beterbiev in either order. Do you know what? If you turn around to me and said Beterbiev was number one, I wouldn't bat an eyelid. But they are the two, head and shoulders above everybody else. And I think that I do have him at number one. Obviously, you look. I know Canelo's not a light heavyweight, but the fact that he beat Canelo with relative ease just goes to show you the level of fighter we're talking about here in Dmitrii Bivol. Of course, beat Gilberto Ramirez in a fight that was meant to be relatively, people thought Ramirez was a potential threat at light heavyweight after his reign at super middleweight. Arguably won every round against Ramirez. Obviously has those other victories on his resume as well against the likes of, obviously we've got Britain's own Craig Richards on the record there. A few other decent fighters. But yeah, mate, I think he is the number one for me at 175 pounds. As I said, Beterbiev a close second, but I just think Bivol's got more left in the tank than Beterbiev does. What about yourself, mate? Do you agree with me?
Yeah, you know what, Paul? I actually completely agree with you. I think there's more question marks on this circling around now about Beterbiev in the sense he's had this injury. I think we'll kind of know a lot more about kind of where he's at after that when he fights Callum Smith, and that's a test for him as well. And I agree with you. Actually, I think the performance that he put in against Anthony Yarde. Don't get me wrong, he obviously beat Anthony Yarde in sort of destructive fashion, but taking quite a few punches in that fight. And like you said, there's miles on the clock. He's older. I think Bivol just so smooth. Like the performance he put in against Canelo was outrageous. I think to be honest, he could beat Canelo down at super middle if he wanted to get down there as well. Outrageous boxing ability. Gilberto Ramirez was what 44-0 when he fought him, so it was undefeated 44 fights. Yeah, his record was. You could obviously, I know we've both said it as well, arguably quite padded, but equally was undefeated fighter going into that fight and absolutely just absolutely battered him for the entire fight. And again, Joe Smith Jr. is on the record as well. So yeah, I actually think it leans more towards Bivol now, frankly. Given, like I said, Beterbiev, there's question marks over where he's at really, and we'll see. I suppose if he comes out and flattens Callum Smith in a round or two, maybe we're sitting there going, "Oh shit, maybe there's a lot more in the tank." But at the moment, I actually have Bivol as number one in the division as well. But I want to touch on that, Paul. We both got one and two, and we're not supposed to be previewing that fight necessarily with any sort of predictions. But what I am going to ask you is, if that was to happen, say after this fight, and say Beterbiev comes through Callum Smith, they were to fight next. How do you see that fight going? Do you see it as simple as maybe a Bivol points, or do you think that Beterbiev could stop him? How do you see it going?
Yeah, I knew you were going to do this to me because I suppose it's the only question that makes sense really when you're talking about these two. Mate, I think Bivol wins that fight, yes, against Beterbiev. If I'm being realistic, by the time this fight happens, probably going to be, if it is to happen, it'll be back end of 2024, by which stage Beterbiev will be, 39, touching 40. Um, and not as active as he once was, perhaps as well. Do you know what, mate? Don't. Yeah, I would lean towards a Bivol stoppage. Sorry, no, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. A Bivol points. But I think Beterbiev would have moments in the fight, but I would lean towards Bivol winning on points. But again, not completely out of the realms of possibility that even Bivol got a late stoppage. I know he's not a huge puncher, and his record doesn't indicate that. But there comes a time where your skill just creates so many openings for a stoppage, and so even if you're not a huge puncher, they'll present some openings might present themselves for Bivol. But yeah, that's not to say that it'll be one sided at all. But I do think Bivol beats Beterbiev, and I would lean towards points. What about yourself, mate?
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I think it'll be a case of Bivol boxing smoothly, won't it? I don't. He's not going to get into any sort of firefight. It's not necessarily a style with, especially with someone like Beterbiev. So I think he's just, yeah, I think like it'll be very kind of cagey. I think I see it being quite a cagey kind of opening, but Bivol just kind of pulling away on the scorecards. I'd be surprised if he stopped him, frankly, but it depends again on how much Beterbiev has in the tank coming down the stretch. So I think Bivol will outbox him, frankly. I think it's be a relatively wide decision, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm talking like 8-4, 8-4 on the card sort of thing. But Paul, we are unfortunately not talking about that fight. We're talking about Lyndon Arthur versus Dmitrii Bivol. But before we get into predictions, which we are going to get onto next, I'm going to throw a question to you here, which is you mentioned obviously Bivol not necessarily being a knockout puncher, which he's not, which is fair play. He's got 11 KOs in 21 fights. Without wishing to give away your prediction, to say, do you think that there's a chance that Bivol could stop Lyndon Arthur here?
Yes, that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, let's go straight onto the prediction. So obviously this fight's taking place, you know, on that super card we were talking about. Paul, I'm going to come to you and just ask. I think we've made it. I think we've made it quite clear. I think we're probably going to lean towards Bivol in this fight. But what I'm going to ask you, I suppose, is to elaborate on that point really and say whether you think it'll be stoppage or points and how it's going to play out.
Yeah, mate. Thanks. I didn't really do you many favors there, throwing it straight back with the one-worded answer. But no, I think you know what, Lyndon Arthur deserves a whole lot of credit for even taking this fight, in my opinion. And you know what, he beat Anthony Yard. Obviously lost the rematch. He beat Anthony Yard, but he's never got that. Well, let's not beat around the bush. The IBO, I personally don't consider a world title, so he's never got that world title shot. That perhaps Yard's had two. Arthur never got one for beating Yard. So do you know what? I'm not batting an eyelid at the fact that he's getting a world title shot. It just so happens to be against arguably the best in the division and the best in the division, in my opinion. Um, yeah, Arthur's a big puncher in his own right. 16 stoppages in his 23 victories. But for me, mate, I think the writing's on the wall here. For Lyndon Arthur, he was dropped in his last fight by your man Brian Suarez. Yes, he only had one defeat in his record, but not a not an elite fighter like Bivol by any stretch. And for me, mate, there's just warning signs there, and I see Bivol making relatively light work of Lyndon Arthur. And yeah, what Anthony Yard stopped him in four rounds, 5 rounds. I could see something similar for Bivol. I think this will be over by before we even go to the halfway point.
That's quite frustrating because I was hoping to bamboozle you when you said. I was hoping you would go Arthur points. I was going to sweep him by saying not Arthur points, sorry, Bivol points. I was going to sweep in and say I actually think Bivol's going to stop him because I totally agree with you. I think the golfing class here is going to be pronounced. I don't disagree with or have any sort of disregard of Lyndon Arthur's attributes, you know, or the fact that he's got a title shot here. But I think you look at that victory over Anthony Yard as well. What Anthony Yard was going through at that time, had a lot of trouble outside the ring as well. You look at what happened in the rematch, and let's be honest with you, Anthony Yard's not on Bivol's level either. So I feel like Bivol could get this done. Stoppage. I think I'll probably go a bit later than you. I think I'll probably go somewhere between sort of 6 to 8, somewhere around that sort of range. But I think the writing's on the wall, mate. I totally agree with you as well. I think the writing's on the wall for a Bivol KO here. But talking to KOs, me and myself, Paul and I are going to have to stop as well. We're going to be stopped right now on this video. We're going to bring you, obviously, like Paul said, we've got other preview videos coming up. He and I are meeting again for Dubois versus Miller, so check that video out as well. We might be on other videos as well, as yet undecided. But guys, check out the rest of the channel. Like I said, we've got literally previews of everything coming on this monster fight that's coming up on the 23rd, this monster card with AJ Wallen obviously headlining it. Check out the channel for all that. Big fight breakdowns, interviews, reviews, and previews. Paul, as always, thank you very much for joining me. And again, guys, thank you very much for watching.